For almost 6 decades, Tanzania has been ruled by one party, the Chama cha Mapinduzi. But it hasn't been known for committing human rights abuses. That wasn't until they got a new president. This man, John Magufuli, he came to power in 2015, promised to clean up corruption and strengthen the economy. But since his arrival, opposition politicians have been arrested, government critics have gone missing, and there's been a crackdown against the LGBT community. Several nations have withdrawn aid, and the EU has condemned Tanzania for its abuses. Well, to discuss this, we have Tito Magoti in Dar es Salaam. He's an activist with the Legal and Human Rights Center. And in Washington, D.C. is Abdulaziz Sachedina. He's a professor of Islamic Studies at George Mason University. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Tito, let me start with you. Is there a witch hunt against gay people in Tanzania right now?
Actually, no, because that was a campaign which actually was initiated by a governor in Dar es Salaam. But apparently the government issued a statement that there is no movement, like a national movement for hunting down those kind of people, hunting them down in a way that they are going to be attacked or put under scrutiny. The Minister for Foreign Affairs confirmed that that move is not initiated by the government. So precisely there is no such a movement, but merely a call for people to comply with the local and international standards on human rights.
Okay, hold on. You say local and international standards on human rights. So let me go to October 29th. Paul Makonda, the regional commissioner of Dar es Salaam, as you mentioned, that was the commissioner, called on citizens to hand over names of homosexuals. And then he said he and his team would scrutinize social media to hunt down gay people and those who defend them. Now, as far as I'm aware, nothing's happened to Mr. Makonda. He hasn't been told, he hasn't even been told that what he said was wrong in any way. And it seems as if this has the support of the authorities. So you're telling me this is not a campaign and gay people don't have to worry?
Actually, I'm speaking in reference to the statement by the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Honorable Retired Ambassador Augustine Maiga, who came up and appreciate that the government has no movement to hunt down LGBT people, but apparently it was not known as to whether the government sent the governor and as to whether the government was supporting what the governor was doing. But what I recall is that the movement was actually going to bring out some impacts, which even the government appreciated, that if we allow this movement to take place in a manner which was suggested by the governor, perhaps it could abuse some other people's rights, including right to privacy, right to fair trial, Tito, and some other kinds of rights.
1 second, and before I bring in Abdulaziz, just very finally, Tito, we have reports that people have been locked up on suspicion of being gay and that HIV clinics are being shut down. Is that true?
Actually, there is no formal report from the government that there are impacts. But we have heard of a coalition between the World Bank and some donors attempting to withdraw some funds for abuse, that they cannot support some projects or some programs in Tanzania, including on education, because of breach of human rights, including denial of teen students who are getting pregnant while in their schools, denying them to re-enter to schools. So those movements, inclusively, actually the statement by the World Bank was so general that we call for authorities in Tanzania to revisit their doings, their goings with human rights issues, so that they can examine and evaluate if they are fit for being supported. Okay. Because we cannot support education, for instance, while you guys are not are not permitting teenage students to re-enter schools.
Abdulaziz Sachedina, is this because of President John Magufuli's personal preferences / prejudices, or is the government, in a way, reflecting popular sentiment? And when the commissioner of Dar es Salaam said what he said, is that reflecting what a lot of people believe, or is it something that sticks out like a sore thumb?
Actually, in the fifth establishment...
Tito, this is for Abdulaziz. Go ahead, Abdulaziz.
All right, all right.
I think it's important to keep in mind that there's a lot of external influence in Somalia locally. And I think the issue is what kind of pressure are religious communities seeing from outside? Because we know for sure that many rights violations are really sparked by the aid that comes in the form of petrodollars or evangelical groups funding them. And the popular sentiment is very much controlled by the extremist ideas, and some of those ideas within the country which are exported from outside, which are imported from outside. And I think that it's not the President Magufuli's own choice on these issues, but a kind of a pressure on him to respond to these things, because both evangelical groups and the Muslim groups are against, and they do not tolerate the LGBT, sentiments or the gay culture. As a rule, they don't. Therefore, one would expect that even if the country is very much controlled by what we call the democratic constitution, it's still responding to its responsibilities as a state agency.
Tito Magoti, is there pressure from the evangelical groups and more religious Muslim groups to crack down on the gay community?
Actually, that was an initiative by the governor himself. It did not come from some other groups or some other pressure groups, politicians, religious, or some youth movements. It was a personal initiative of a governor. However, the legal framework in Tanzania does not permit such kind of events. And in fact, it is not only the legal framework, it is in fact some policy issues, some other people perceive that these are things to do with morals, or these are things to do with our history, traditions.
Right. So with that in mind, Tito, sorry to interrupt you. With that in mind, have people...
There was no real pressure from the groups.
Okay, so once he said it, did he find that a lot of people supported him after that? I know that the Minister of Foreign Affairs came out and said, no, we will adhere by international human rights standards. But was there popular local support for him when he said it?
Actually, when a statement comes from these, our leaders, politicians, or some from other administrative machineries, they tend to be perceived by people in different perspectives. Those of us with human rights background, we tend to take issues and consider them in line with human rights. But those who are blind and ignorant of these standards tend to take things as they come, or tend to believe that the position by our leaders is perhaps the position of the law, is perhaps a proper standing. So the reaction to those events was varying depending with the kind of people who were actually perceiving them for the moment.
Understood. Abdulaziz Sachedina, very finally, should this be folded into a general restricting of political space for the opposition? Are we seeing a trend here?
I think we are, because generally the government that wants to remain in power uses the law enforcing bodies, and we do find that abuses by the police department in Tanzania. And there is what we call lack of freedoms, freedom to express opposition to the government. This is the beginning of what we call the violations of human rights, because it starts with suppressing the freedoms that are guaranteed by the UDHR, Universal Declaration. that one should have that ability to oppose some of the ideas that the government is pursuing and trying to enforce on the population. I think Tanzania is faced with that, and we know quite well, with the reports that are coming out in different journals and in the different, organizations. Even the NGOs find that they are not able to function the way, if they were going to criticize the government would not tolerate it. That intolerance of the government leads to the violation of the human rights. And human rights need to be preserved at all levels by the state. Individuals are not capable of really defending their rights. It's the state that does for them. And if the state doesn't do it, then we are going to see more and more violations of human rights at all levels of human relations and human freedoms in the state.
Okay, gentlemen, I have to wrap up, but I thank you for joining us, Abdulaziz Sachedina and Tito Magoti. Thanks for joining us on the Newsmakers.